guys, and welcome to the first episode of the Fox series. On this episode, we got a couple of things that we're going to be taking care of. It's not going to be much of like a modification or anything special. Kind of taking care of some safety issues I found with the car. When I first bought it, I brought it home, checked everything out, picked it up in the air, took the wheels off. Found a couple little safety issues. I really got to make the car safe before I can start driving it. Some of those issues I found were that the rear brakes, the axle seals were leaking. Soaked the shoes with gear oil on both sides. The parking brake doesn't work because of it. And when you're trying to stop the car, you get a real bad pulsation in the pedal. The rear brake drums are warped. The car doesn't really stop that good. And I noticed when you're driving it, a little bit of twitchiness in the steering wheel. I got to checking it out. I found I got a loose wheel bearing in the front and I got a blown out inner tie rod. There's a ton of slop in playing it. I'll show you that in a little bit when we go to fix it. So as you can see, we already got the car kind of jacked up in the air. I got the back wheels off of it.
So I thought this was pretty cool. My son wanted to help me work on the car, so he helped me pull the wheels off of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. 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 Pull it. Stop. Stop. Ta-da!
So if you guys have been following my channel, we did axle seals on the 7.3. This in here, you can obviously see it's completely different design. The axle seal sits right back in here. This one here is leaking bad. There's oil all over. You can actually see inside of the drum here. There's literally oil running off of everything. The brake shoes, you can see they're glossy. They're just completely soaked with oil. So what we're going to do, we're going to replace the shoes. We're going to replace the wheel cylinders, all the hardware. We'll get the drum cleaned and then machine it. We'll replace the axle seals, and I have the axle shaft bearings. So we'll get all that replaced, and this thing will be like new when we're all done. Here's the parts that we're going to be installing today. We got new wheel cylinders. They're Ray Bestos wheel cylinders. There's your part number. This right here is the hardware kit for the rear brakes. So this will have all the springs and everything. And I find this funny. It has right here on the front Motorcraft. You pull your bag out. Made in China. So disappointing. So we got here the axle bearings. These right here, I always like using Timken parts. There's your part number. And on these, they're not like your regular taper bearing. So here's that bearing out of the box. It's just a caged roller bearing, not a taper bearing. So there's no preload or anything on this. You basically just drive it into the axle housing till it's seated and put your axle in. Pretty simple and straightforward. These right here are the axle seals. Again, Timken part. I can't really get it to focus on the part number, but it's 8660S. And then we got two of those, right and the left. So there it is out of the box. Nothing fancy. And then onto our brake shoes. Again, using factory Ford Motorcraft parts. There's your part number. And inside that box, we have a leading and a trailing shoe. So these ones here, they can be right or left. You're going to have two that are the exact same. You can see how the shoe lining is the same length. Whereas if I stack it on top of this one here, you can see our shoe lining is a different length. So that's everything we got for the back of the car. Here's what I have for the front. So since we're doing a wheel bearing repack, we're going to be using some Timken hub seals. There's a part number 9150S, and those very similar to the rear seal. And then we got a Moog inner tie rod to replace the one that's blown out. One side looks really good. I think it may have actually been replaced at one point. The other side, as sloppy as can be. And here we got it. Nothing special, just an inner tie rod. There is going to be a couple of special tools you're going to need to do this job. I don't actually own these tools, so lucky for me, the local O'Reilly Auto Parts store had them in stock. So the tools you need, this right here is a bearing remover set. This one here is actually made by EverTough. There's your part number on it. I'll give a little tutorial on this in a minute on how to use that, because you need that to pull the rear axle bearings out. We need the bearing race driver, mainly because these work really good for driving in the axle seals, the front hub seals, and for driving in the axle bearings. This one here, another EverTough part. There's your part number. And then you need the Big Daddy slide hammer. I do have a slide hammer, but it's a light duty. I don't have anything this big. This also is an EverTough, and there's your part number. So now that we got the axle cover off, we need to roll the diff around till you get to this 8mm bolt right here, and then you take this out, pull this bolt out, and it'll have like a little stud on the end of it. And what that does is it holds this cross pin in. That cross pin should be in there pretty loose, and a lot of the times you can kind of angle it down and push on it from the back side, and it should fall right out. So now once you get that out of the way, all you have to do to get the C-clips out so you can remove the axle is you push the axle in. Well, so I wasn't lucky enough to have that C-clip fall out, so I'm just going to take a little screwdriver and give this thing here a little nudge. There it goes. And there it is. There's one of the C-clips. So now that we got that out, we can just slide the axle out. But I'm going to get this other C-clip out first. So let me show you how this bearing puller tool works. So in this kit, you have 3 different size pullers. You need to get your bearing and size it to the tool that fits. And in this case, it's going to be this one here. So if you look, the tool is about the same size as the bearing outer shell, this part right here. So this right here is the tool that we're going to use. It's actually the smallest one in the kit. And then you just want to back this nut all the way back, slide the tool into the housing, and hook it to the back of the bearing, and then tighten this nut down. Kind of give it a little wiggle as you seat this down. You don't need it to be tight, just hand tight. Okay, so now that puller is in there. Then take your slide hammer and you're going to thread it into the end of the bearing puller. Okay, and then once you get that threaded in there tight, just give a couple whacks with the slide hammer and it'll pop the bearing and the seal out.
Oh, yeah.
Just like that.
Whoa.
Once you get the axle out of the way, it's a whole bunch easier to get the brake springs off now than it is trying to fight everything all together. So I usually just take this stuff off and try and either lay it out of the way or you know, just set it up so I kind of have an idea of how it goes back together. Once you get everything clean, we're going to take the wheel cylinder off. And really what it is it's two 7/16 bolts on the back side. and then a 7/16 hard line for the brake line. Alright, so you're going to want to take your new wheel cylinder, get it lined up in this hole, and get your brake line started first. That's always the hardest part, but you got to make sure that you get the brake line started, or else you're going to end up cross-threading it. So now we got this all cleaned up. We got our wheel cylinder installed. I got the brake line tight. Got, again, everything just final washed down with brake clean. Got some new gloves on that way we don't get oil all over our new brake shoes. I got everything here ready to go back together. So we'll start putting these brake shoes on. And again, on here, you're gonna have a long shoe and a short shoe. Your long shoe is always gonna go to the back, your short shoe to the front, because when this wheel's spinning, you step on the brake, the wheel cylinder pushes the shoes out. This short shoe touches the drum. It pushes on the star wheel, which kicks the rear shoe over. And then you have more friction surface going on the drum to slow this thing down. So this right here is actually the one that does the majority of your braking. This one here applies first, but the rear shoe does your braking. So always have your bigger shoe on the back. All right, so we got this here all installed. We'll work on getting the axle seal and bearing back in. And then we'll get the axle shaft back in, and then I'll get the other side done. All right, so to put the bearing in, there's not really anything super special about this, but you set that up in there. You take a driver that's the same size as the outer of the bearing, but not bigger because you don't want it to hit the housing, and then you drive it in. Now when you hear that nice solid thud, you know it's all the way in. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to put our seal in. But before I do that, I want to put a little bit of oil on the outer. I want to oil that bearing, and I want to put a little bit of grease on the inside lip of the seal. And I'm going to have to change out this driver because, as you can see, it's a little bit too small. This one here, I need it to be a little bit bigger so that way it'll stop flush on the axle housing. That feels pretty darn good to me. So now we go ahead and put the axle shaft back in. Usually like to just put a little bit of oil right where that seal is going to be riding. That way I can make sure it's not going to be dry on anything at all when we go to start it. But you don't want to get carried away to where you get dripping oil all over your shoes. So that's in. And I think what I'm going to do from here is I'm going to stop the video. I'm going to get the other side together. I'll pick up where I'm getting ready to put the C-clips back in. So here's where we're at. We got everything in. I got the axle in. I got the rear cover here all cleaned up, and it's pretty much ready to reinstall. And I got the rear axle here cleaned up and ready to get the C-clips back in. We'll get the pin in, and then we'll do a final wipe down, and then we'll get that gear cover back on. You are going to hear a little bit of whining in the background. My son's out here doing hot laps in his little John Deere tractor, just having a blast. So, can you say hi? Hey, it keeps them out of my hair, so whatever we got to do, right? So here's how we go about getting these C-clips back in. And sorry for the shadow, I'm trying to hold a light and work one-handed. So you're going to take your C-clip and set it right back into the axle. Now you have to have the axle pushed in to be able to do this. And you should be able to just slide it up in there and then pull your axle shaft back, and it should lock that clip into place. And now that we got the clips in, we're going to just roll the axle. So this right here is back at the point where the pin's going to go in, and if you notice on this pin it has a hole on one end. So we're going to want to put this pin going in the hole with the bolt hole facing us, and then you want to try and line all this stuff up. So this pin should go in flush to the housing like that, and then we should be able to just push that in, and then we should be able to just tighten this bolt up.
Okay guys, so we're starting day 2 here of this this project. Actually, let me show you where I left off at.
Got the differential cover back in place, and I did get fluid back into it.
So what I got to do from here is I need to get the brake shoes sized to fit the drum. So you can see I got the tool here for doing that. And really all you have to do is take a measurement of your drum at its widest point, and you get it to where this is just lightly dragging, and then you're going to want to size the widest point of your shoes to it. So you can see here I got probably about 1/8 of an inch that I need to move the shoes out. So we'll get the shoes adjusted, and then we'll get the drum slid back on. Then I'll do the other side, and then we'll move on to getting the brake system flushed out. If you don't have a brake flusher, this is the one to get. I've used a bunch of different type. I've tried the vacuum operated ones. I've tried the high dollar, you know, hook them to shop air ones. This one here, bang for the buck, best thing I've ever got. It's Mighty Vac. There's a model number MV6400. It'll work with transmission fluid, brake fluid, any kind of fluid that you need to dispense. You could even use it with gear oil. I use this one here strictly for brake fluid. That way I don't got to worry about any contaminations or do anything else. All you have to do is unscrew the cap. You pour all your fluid in, screw the cap back down. It has a little gauge on here that you basically all you got to do is take this hand pump. You pump the tank full of pressure. You get about 10 pounds of pressure in it or so. The little gauge will move up here into the green. This end here, you click onto your adapter. And I went and I got the adapter kit. This right here is all the different vehicles that this will fit. You got imports, domestics. You even have a universal cap that you basically just put on, and then use these chains. You chain it down so that way it holds it in place. This one here though, for doing this forward, we're going to use a standard 3-prong cap. So this will go in place at the master cylinder reservoir. We'll hook the hose on, and then we just start going through and bleeding the brakes. All right guys, so it's gonna be kind of bright working with the sun shining right on everything, but so I already got my tank pressurized. It's got about 12 pounds pressure in it, and I'm just gonna hang it right off of the hood here, and we're gonna take the cap, I'm gonna screw it onto the reservoir, no different than you would just a regular cap, and then hook up your quick connect. And you can watch your brake fluid level. It should kind of hit a certain point and stop. All right, so this one did just that. I can see my fluid level went up right in between the minimum and maximum line. I can see my fluid stopped flowing. I don't have any leaks. So I'm just gonna leave it just like that, and then we're gonna move on to bleeding out the wheels. So you can kind of see here we got fluid just flowing right on out. Okay, so we've run about 9 ounces of fluid through here. You can see how clear the fluid coming through the line is now. It's about as clean as we're gonna get. So then all I gotta do here is just close my bleeder, and we'll move on to the next one. ready, go. Okay, last one, go. Good job. All right, so we got about 9 ounces, 10 ounces of fluid out of here. You can see we got nice clean fluid. So we're gonna go ahead and stop this one and move on to the next wheel, the last wheel. Wheels back on, everything's bled. I have a little bit of brake fluid left in there. I'm sure you can't see it in the light. Maybe you can see it right there. That's what's left of a 32 ounce bottle. So you can see we get a good job of flushing everything out. And you can see on the gauge there's a little bit of pressure. All you have to do is hit this pressure bleed. Let your pressure bleed off. Then you can take the line off, close the valve, and take this off. I will have to correct my fluid level because it's a little bit over, but that's going to be easy enough. You're hungry again?
Yeah.
You need a banana and a waffle?
Yeah.
Okay, let me go help. Now, if you see all this play, that's bad. It shouldn't have any movement at all. And that's where I say the tie rod on this here is blown out. Okay, so if you watch right here, that's the inner tie rod. I'm gonna rock this wheel back and forth and you'll see the movement. All right, so got the front end jacked up. It's on stands, got the tires off. So this right here is the side with the bad tie rod. So what I need to do is knock this jam nut loose, and I'm just gonna back it off and stop it. I'm not gonna take it all the way off because I wanna use that to try and center an adjustment. We're gonna pull the cotter pin, take the castle nut, and pop the tie rod off of here. So there's a bunch of different ways you can take a tie rod off. You can lightly put the castle nut back on and hit the spindle with a hammer. You can try and heat them up with a torch. You can use a pickle fork if you really want to destroy the joint. I've always just liked using one of these. They actually just slide right over the spindle. This centered over the top of the tie rod joint. And then you just hit them with an impact, and they usually pop the tie rod right off. Just like that. No damage, no stress, no swinging hammers. Simple and easy. You can pick these up anywhere. I think I got this one at Napa for, I don't even know, like 15 bucks. Totally worth it. Okay, so now back under the car here. Let's see if I can actually get some light so we can see what we're doing. We got to get this boot off. There's a clamp right here you have to take loose. I actually already did that. And you need to pop this tube right here off of this boot. And it's going to be kind of hard because this line is usually stuck in here pretty good. And we also got to walk this boot off without destroying it. So I made the decision to not buy a new boot. I'm kind of starting to regret that here a little bit because I don't know if this is going to come off without getting destroyed. Well, actually, it looks like it is. Pop this tube off of the other side. So we'll do this. We'll slide this tube here out. We'll get all of this gunk and grease and crap cleaned off, and then we'll get it reinstalled when we go back together. I'm not sure if you can see it, but there's a rivet right there. So we're going to have to drill the rivet out. Luckily, they only put it on one side, and I should be able to get a drill right in there. So let me get that drilled out. All right, so got the rivet drilled out, knocked off. Now, I don't have a wrench. It's actually the correct size for this, so I'm just going to use my crescent wrench. Hope for the best. All right, that actually came loose fairly easy. So now what we can do is just unthread this whole assembly. Now, if you guys notice, this one here is so worn out, I can turn this whole tie rod and the nut's not even moving. It's not supposed to be like that. Okay, so while on the bench here, I got this tie rod cleaned up a little bit so it wasn't as greasy to mess with. So again, this nut here, it's just finger tight on here. We're gonna back this tie rod off. And the reason we wanna do that is so we can keep our adjustment. I'm really hoping that the replacement tie rod is gonna be the same size.
So I'm going to take a measurement from the nut to the end, which I am dead even at 2 inches. So 2 inches from the end to the nut. And I know this is upside down, but you guys are upside down. Okay, now we can take this nut off. You see, if I was smart and just bought a new boot, I wouldn't have to really worry about doing any of this. I could just throw this whole thing in the garbage and move forward, but I didn't do that. And these boots are actually kind of like a plastic. They aren't even really rubber, which kind of makes them a little bit easy to work with. There we go. You just gotta make sure that they're not hard and brittle or torn. If it's torn, just throw it away. This one here, I'm reusing it because it's still good. So here you can see, here's our old tie rod, all floppy. You can see the play in there. Shouldn't be like that. Okay, so here's our new Moog part, and you can see here there is no play in the end of this, and I can't even move it by hand. That's how tight these should be. Now this one here did already come with a nut on it, so we're going to take that off to get the boot on. And where this old tie rod had a rivet for security to keep it from backing off, Moog gives you this little bag, and inside of it is 2 very small roll pins. Ideally, you would be doing this with a rack on the bench. I'm doing it in the car, so I'm just going to be able to get 1 roll pin through either one of these holes, and that'll be our securement to keep it from backing off. So before we go reassembling this, I want to make sure that my length is the same between the two. So from that joint going to this new one, they're actually a different length. So we're going to have to take a measurement here to figure out the difference. It's right about 1/4 of an inch. All right, so got this back on. We got the boot line back up where it needs to be. So now with this new tie rod being 1/4 inch longer, all I have to do is just, instead of this measurement being 2, we're going to go 2 1/4, because this extra length on the end is just going to end up going inside of the outer tie rod. So shouldn't be too much of an issue. And we're about right there. All right, so you can see that the threads are sticking through here longer. The old tie rod, they were about flush. So I'm gonna leave it like that because I am gonna have to clock this here all a little bit to get it to line back up. But from here, this is all done. We'll get it back in the car now. Sorry guys, my camera apparently decided that it wanted to just stop. So I missed a bunch of what I was doing. Really all it was, I got the roll pin back in. We got this transfer tube back in, and we got the clamp tightened back down. So now we just got to worry about getting the outer tie rod put back on, and then this part of the job at least is done. So this right here is what I have. This is just a Dorman brand cotter pin kit. You can see there's a bunch of random sizes in there. I try and restock it with stuff when I can. So this is how I always do these. I get them to where the looped end goes into the castle, and then I pull one end all the way up and bend it back, kind of like that, and then I clip the excess off with a pair of dikes. So that's what you end up with the way that I put the cotter pin in. That nut's never going to come back out. The cotter pin's not in there super tight, so it makes it easy to get out. I do still have to tighten down my jam nut, but look how much better this is already. There's no slack in that, so that's just exactly what we need it to do. It should hopefully tighten up my steering a whole bunch. So the next thing we'll get into here is we're going to repack these wheel bearings. All right, so now we're on to the wheel bearing part. So we're going to start by pulling this caliper out of the way. So one thing I like to do is take like a coat hook or a hanger, put it somewhere on the frame off of a coil spring. This one actually has a nice little hole in the fender apron. Then you can take your caliper off and hang it where it's up out of the way, and you're not going to have any tension getting put on that brake line. So that would be nice and secure. So now we got to get this cap off. I like to use like a rigid scraper If you got a stiff putty knife, that usually works pretty good too. And then just lightly pry these off. You don't want to get carried away with pounding on it because you don't want to distort that cat. So one of the things you are going to need to do this job is a bunch of rags because everything should be covered in grease. All right, so let's get this cotter pin out of here. So it looks like somebody may have been in here not too long ago. These actually look like they got pretty fresh grease on it. All right, got that cotter pin out, so now we're going to take this castle nut off. And then we can take this nut here off. Now this nut should be loose. If it's tight, you got problems. Okay, now you can give the rotor a little wiggle and this bearing should come out. So there's bearing number 1. And then we're going to pull the whole hub off. Okay, so we're back at the bench. We're going to get this axle seal out. One old seal out of the way. We got a bearing. And here's what I find to be interesting. So all the grease that I had on the outside of that bearing cap was pretty fresh and new. But when you look in here, this grease is old. Look how nasty that is. It's got, it's what I call, it has cracks in it. This grease is no longer lubricating anything. It's just actually kind of starting to solidify. So we'll get all this cleaned out. We'll get some fresh grease in there and make this thing whole again. All right, so I got the inner bearing here kind of cleaned up. I also got the hub cleaned out. So if you haven't used one of these bearing packers before, this red piece is actually just like a dust cap, just to keep all the junk out. So once you get that off, you unscrew this white piece. You drop your bearing in, and then you give a push. Then once you see the grease coming through the bearing, you're all good. All right, so got the bearing all packed, got it set in there with a new seal. We're going to take the seal driver and put it back in flush. So I'm going to give this just a quick little wipe down with some brake clean, and then I'm going to put it back up on the spindle. We'll get the outer bearing on and we'll get everything torqued back down. All right guys, so we got our hub back on here. We got the bearing repacked. So we're going to put the bearing on. Then you do your washer. And then we have our nut. Now this does actually have a tightening sequence that you have to go through to get the preload on the bearing set right. So the way you got to do this here, the book actually says to tighten this down while you're spinning the hub. They want you to put it 17 to 25 foot-pounds. So you could pretty much guess that. Then you want to back the nut off a half a turn. And that's just to take the preload off of it. So the half turn isn't very technical. Then they want you to tighten it down 10 to 12 inch-pounds, which is basically like finger tight. 12 inch-pounds is 1 foot-pound, right? So keep that in mind. It's not much at all. You're basically just taking the slack out of the bearing. Then when you get that done, you put your castle keeper back on. Well, make sure you line it up so that way you can at least get a cotter pin through one of the holes. Like I say guys, if the cotter pin's a little bit long, it really doesn't matter too much because you can always go and trim them back. So on these ones here, I actually do them a little bit different than I do on the tie rods. I turn these ones sideways if I can. There we go. And then I take this part here and I curl it up around the sides. clip off my excess length, and then I actually just take a hammer and fold them up just like that. So that way I know nothing's coming loose. Then I just take a little bit of grease in the cap, wipe this down. And then you can put your cap back on. So now there's a lot of people I see where they just go and they pound these caps on right in the middle. I've actually seen that destroy these caps and it'll dent them in. So I like to take my rigid scraper and tap right on the edge of these. All right, so now that we've got everything all wiped down, we're gonna put our caliper back on. And I did put a little bit of lube on the slide pins. All right, then we just gotta throw the tire on and we are done. So I'm gonna kind of blow through, get this other side done, and show you what we got when we're all finished up.
Well guys, I just got back from about a 15-mile test drive with the car. Brakes feel so much better now that they're actually working. They don't stop at all when they're covered in oil. So parking brake feels good. Brakes feel good all the way around. The car stops really nice. The steering wheel, it is a little bit off-centered. The car has a bad tendency to want to kind of pull to the left now. The steering wheel's off to the right. I kind of expected that was going to happen just because anytime you go change an alignment component without doing alignment, you're just guessing. So I'm not going to worry about doing the alignment right now. Kind of the next thing I want to save up my money for to do. I want to get some lowering coils, and I really do want to get rid of these wheels. I'm not a huge fan of the 10-hole design. Got my eye on a couple different ones made by SVE. So that'll be coming down the road. It's probably going to be a little while, but honestly, if these tires get destroyed because the alignment's off, I really don't care. They're old. The date code on them is actually from 1991. They're super old tires. There's not even really safe to be driving on. So they're going to go away soon, but that'll be coming down the road. So thanks guys for watching. I'm actually going to call this the end of the episode. And I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you watched it all the way through. And remember to like, subscribe, share. If you subscribe, hit that little notification bell. That way you can get notified every time I got a video coming out. And I really look forward to seeing you guys on the next one. Thanks a lot.